There are moments in your life that arrive disguised as something ordinary. They wear the camouflage of a Tuesday night, the familiar weight of a shared blanket, the low hum of a refrigerator in a quiet apartment. You don't recognize them as architects of your future. They are simply moments, unremarkable until they become the hinge upon which your entire world swings. For me, that moment smelled like old books and Julian's laundry detergent, a scent I had known for years. It was the moment his hand, which had been resting casually on the space between us on the worn sofa cushions, shifted. It was a geological event on a microscopic scale, a tectonic plate of unspoken feeling grinding against another. And in the aftershock, nothing was ever the same. It wasn't a grand gesture. It was just a hand. His hand, which I knew as well as my own, perhaps better. I knew the cartography of his knuckles from the time he'd tried to fix his own bike chain and failed spectacularly. I knew the small, pale scar on his index finger from a kitchen knife incident involving an avocado pit. I knew the way his fingers would drum restlessly on any available surface when he was deep in thought, a percussive rhythm that had become the background music of my life. That night, we were watching some forgettable documentary about deep-sea life, the television casting a cool, blue-white glow across the living room, illuminating dust motes dancing in the artificial twilight. He had been quiet, a heavy, contemplative stillness that had draped itself over him in the weeks following his breakup with Sarah. His usual energy, a kind of kinetic hum that always seemed to vibrate just under his skin, was banked, leaving behind a profound quiet that felt both foreign and fragile. We were teasing each other earlier, a gentle back and forth about my photography, about the impossible deadlines he was facing at work. It was our language, a shorthand built over 7 years of friendship, a way of checking in without having to ask the heavy questions. But the teasing had faded, replaced by the hushed narration of the documentary and the comfortable silence that had always defined our shared space. His hand had been lying palm down on the cushion, a silent island between us. Mine was nearby, a mirror image. We were close, as we often were, our shoulders almost touching, the heat of his body a familiar presence just inches from my own. Then the shift. His fingers uncurled slowly, a sea anemone testing the current. His pinky finger brushed against mine. It was nothing. It was a twitch, an accident, a consequence of proximity. I held my breath, my entire consciousness narrowing to that single point of contact. My internal monologue, usually a constant, analytical stream, went utterly silent. There was only the whisper-light touch of his skin against mine. I waited for him to pull back, for the casual, accidental nature of the touch to be confirmed by its brevity. I had a whole narrative prepared in my mind for when he did. A small, self-deprecating smile, a slight shift away to re-establish the familiar boundary. It was the script we had always followed. But he didn't pull back. Instead, his hand moved with an impossible, agonizing slowness, covering the microscopic distance until his fingers were interlaced with mine. It wasn't a grip. It was a settling, a quiet declaration of arrival. His thumb stroked the back of my hand once, a single, deliberate motion that sent a tremor straight through my ribcage. The narrator on the television was talking about bioluminescent creatures in the crushing darkness of the abyss, and I thought, yes, that is what this feels like. A sudden, impossible light in the deepest, most silent part of myself. My own hand, which had been frozen, a statue of indecision, finally responded. My fingers curled around his, a silent answer to a question he hadn't spoken. And we just stayed there. We stayed there as the documentary ended and the credits rolled, as the television automatically switched to some loud, obnoxious reality show. We didn't speak. We didn't look at each other. We just held hands in the flickering blue light, and I felt the carefully constructed walls of our friendship, the ones I had spent years reinforcing, begin to dissolve into dust. To understand the weight of that single, silent gesture, you have to understand the foundation it was built upon. Julian and I were an exercise in complementary opposition. We met in a sophomore-level macroeconomics class, a prerequisite neither of us wanted to take. He was the confident one, the one who would challenge the professor, his hand always shooting up, not with arrogance, but with a genuine, relentless curiosity. He was a software engineering major, his mind a place of logic and elegant code, of problems and solutions. I was the quiet art student in the back, a photographer who saw the world not in lines of code, but in frames of light and shadow. I barely spoke a word in that class. I just watched. I watched the way the afternoon light from the tall, arched windows would catch in his dark hair, the way he'd chew on the end of his pen when a concept wasn't clicking, the way he'd break into a wide, unself-conscious grin when he finally grasped it. He was a creature of kinetic energy, and I was a student of stillness. Our friendship didn't ignite, it seeped. It started with him asking to borrow my notes, not because he needed them, but, as he'd later admit, because I was the only person in the room who seemed to be paying more attention to the professor than to their phone. That led to late-night study sessions in the campus library, fueled by vending machine coffee and a shared sense of academic dread. It was there I discovered the person beneath the confident exterior. I discovered his absurd love for terrible science fiction movies from the 50s, his encyclopedic knowledge of baseball statistics, and his deep, abiding loyalty to the people he cared about. And he, in turn, seemed to find a strange sort of peace in my quiet. He called my silence a low-power mode, a place where he could finally stop processing, stop performing, and just be. He'd talk for hours about his code, his family, his frustrations, and I would listen, offering a word here and there, but mostly just offering my presence. It was enough. After graduation, when the flimsy scaffolding of college life fell away, we were one of the few friendships that remained load-bearing. We got an apartment together, a slightly run-down two-bedroom with mismatched furniture and a window that overlooked a perpetually damp alleyway. It was our fortress. He was the one who filled it with noise and people, hosting game nights and post-bar gatherings. I was the one who made it a home, who kept the plants alive, who made sure there was always coffee, who turned one of the small closets into a makeshift darkroom. My photography was my life, a solitary pursuit of capturing the unspoken truths in a fleeting expression or the slant of light on a forgotten object. Julian was my greatest champion. He came to every one of my small gallery shows, dragging his friends along, talking about my work with a fierce pride that always made my cheeks burn. He saw things in my photos that I hadn't even seen myself, articulating the emotion I was trying to capture with a clarity that astonished me. My feelings for him were a slow developing photograph, emerging gradually in the chemical bath of our shared lives. There was no single moment of revelation. It was 1,000 tiny moments. It was the way he'd bring me a mug of tea, exactly how I liked it, when he saw me hunched over my editing software late at night. It was the way his laugh could completely fill a room, a sound so genuine it felt like a physical warmth. It was watching him sleep on the couch, his face unguarded and peaceful, and feeling a fierce, protective ache in my chest that was so profound it almost hurt to breathe. For years, I kept these feelings locked away in the most secure vault of my heart. He was my best friend, the central pillar of my life. The thought of jeopardizing that, of making him uncomfortable or losing him entirely, was unbearable. It was a risk I was completely unwilling to take. So I became an expert in emotional camouflage. I dated other people, short-lived, lukewarm affairs that always felt like I was speaking a foreign language. I listened to him talk about the women he was dating, offering advice, playing the part of the supportive, platonic friend with an Oscar-worthy performance. He had a type, bright, bubbly, energetic women who matched his own outward frequency. Sarah was the longest-lasting, a 3-year relationship that everyone, including me, assumed would end in marriage. I liked her. I truly did. But every time I saw them together, saw him look at her with an affection I craved for myself, it was like a tiny, hairline fracture spreading across a pane of glass. I learned to live with the fractures. I told myself that this friendship, this deep, unwavering brotherly love, was more than enough. It had to be. The breakup with Sarah was the catalyst, the external event that sent a shockwave through the stable ecosystem of our lives. It wasn't dramatic or acrimonious. It was worse. It was a slow, sad erosion. A mutual acknowledgement that they were on different paths, that the love they had was real, but not infinite. Julian was gutted. It wasn't just the loss of her. It was the loss of the future he had so meticulously coded in his mind. He was a man who thrived on plans, on predictable outcomes, and suddenly, his entire operating system had crashed. He didn't talk about it much, not directly. Instead, the grief manifested in other ways. He stopped going out. The usual buzz of people in our apartment fell silent. He started working longer hours, burying himself in complex projects, but he came home hollowed out, the exhaustion clinging to him like a shroud. He would sit on the couch, the same couch where our hands would later touch, and just stare into space, his energetic presence replaced by a dense, gravitational pull of melancholy. I tried to be the good friend. I cooked for him, knowing he'd forget to eat. I put on his favorite terrible sci-fi movies, hoping to coax a smile out of him. I gave him space when he seemed to need it and sat with him in silence when that felt right, too. I was treading carefully on the fragile ground of his heartbreak, terrified of making a wrong move. I was so focused on his pain that I didn't notice, at first, how he was starting to lean on me in a new way. It began subtly. He started leaving the door to his bedroom ajar at night. For years, that door had been a firm boundary. We respected each other's privacy implicitly. But now, it was cracked open, a silent invitation, or perhaps a cry for help. I'd see the thin sliver of light from his bedside lamp slicing across the dark hallway floor and feel a strange pang in my chest. It felt like he was making sure I was still there, a lighthouse in the fog of his loneliness. Then came the nights on the couch. He'd fall asleep watching television, his head eventually slumping onto my shoulder. The first time it happened, I froze, every muscle in my body tensed. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. He was just asleep, I told myself. It was an unconscious act of seeking comfort, nothing more. I should wake him, tell him to go to his own bed. But I couldn't. The solid, trusting weight of him against me was a kind of agony and a kind of bliss. His breathing evened out, a soft, rhythmic puff of air against my neck. I sat there for over an hour, my own body aching with the stillness, just so I wouldn't disturb him. It became a pattern. A few nights a week, he would drift off beside me, and I would let him, cherishing the stolen intimacy, the plausible deniability of it all. I was a cartographer of his sleeping habits, learning the way his hand would sometimes twitch, the way he would murmur indecipherable things in his dreams. I was living in a dangerous, beautiful gray area, and I was terrified of the moment the lights would come on and expose me. The ritual of our evenings began to solidify into a new, unspoken normal. The pretense of watching a movie became thinner and thinner, the screen merely a flickering excuse for proximity. We would settle onto the couch, and a silent negotiation of space would commence. In the beginning, there was a careful cushion of distance between us, a buffer zone of neutral territory. But as the weeks wore on, that territory shrank. His leg would press against mine, from knee to ankle. He would drape an arm across the back of the sofa, his fingers sometimes brushing against my hair. Each new point of contact was a quiet explosion in my nervous system. I would analyze every gesture, every shift in weight, searching for intent, for meaning. Was this just the casual intimacy of two people who had lived together for years? Or was it something more? My mind became a frantic courtroom, with hope and fear as the opposing counsels, each presenting their evidence. Hope would point to the lingering touches, the softening of his gaze when he looked at me. Fear would argue that I was projecting, that I was seeing what I wanted to see in the actions of a grieving man seeking platonic comfort. I was the judge and the jury, and I could never reach a verdict. The true escalation, the moment that shifted the ritual from the public space of the living room to the private space of the bedroom, happened on a rainy Tuesday night. A thunderstorm was raging outside, the kind that rattles the window panes and makes the lights flicker. Julian hated thunderstorms. It was a childhood fear he'd never quite outgrown, something he was usually sheepish about. That night, the fear seemed amplified by his fragile emotional state. I found him in the kitchen at 2 in the morning, staring out the window at the rain-lashed alley, his shoulders hunched. He looked younger than I had ever seen him, and profoundly lost. "Can't sleep," he'd mumbled, not looking at me. "Me neither," I lied. He was quiet for a long moment, watching the lightning bleach the sky white. Then, so quietly I almost didn't hear him over the drumming rain, he said, "This is going to sound stupid. Nothing you say sounds stupid." I replied, my voice softer than I intended. He finally turned to look at me, his eyes dark and shadowed. Would you care if I just brought a blanket into your room? Slept on the floor? My room feels too big tonight. Too empty." My heart did a slow, painful somersault. This was new territory. Uncharted. Dangerous. The safe, semi-public space of the couch was one thing. My bedroom was another. It was my sanctuary, the quietest corner of our shared world. To let him in, even just on the floor, felt like letting him into a part of myself I had always kept guarded. But the look on his face, the raw vulnerability in his eyes, dismantled all my defenses. Saying no felt like an act of cruelty. Of course, I heard myself say, "The floor is probably uncomfortable, though. You can take the bed." "I'll take the floor." "No," he said, too quickly. "No, I don't want to be alone." So he brought his pillow and a thick comforter into my room. He laid them out on the floor at the foot of my bed, a small, makeshift nest. I turned off the light and got into bed, my body rigid with a hyper-awareness of his presence. I could hear every rustle of the blanket, every breath he took. The air in the room felt thick, charged with unspoken things. We didn't speak. The only sounds were the storm outside and the quiet symphony of two people pretending to be asleep. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. What did this mean? Was this the act of a desperate friend, or was it a tentative step across a line we'd never acknowledged? I was a photographer in a darkroom, waiting for an image to appear, unsure if the final picture would be one of beautiful clarity or a mess of overexposed hope. That night on the floor became the first of many. Soon, the pretense of the thunderstorm was gone. It was replaced by a simple, unadorned, "Mind if I crash in here tonight?" My answer was always the same quiet affirmation. He never explained why, and I never asked. We existed within the comfortable confines of this new ambiguity. Some nights he would talk, his voice a low murmur in the darkness, telling me about his day, about a frustrating bug in his code, about a memory of Sarah that had ambushed him that afternoon. I would listen from my bed, a disembodied voice of comfort in the dark. Other nights, we were silent, the space between his makeshift bed on the floor and my mattress filled with a tension that was both comforting and excruciating. The transition from the floor to the bed was as gradual and unspoken as everything else. It happened during a particularly cold week in November. The old building's heating was notoriously unreliable, and my room was the warmest in the apartment. He came in one night, shivering, and made his usual spot on the floor. After an hour of listening to his teeth chatter softly, I couldn't stand it anymore. "Julian," I whispered into the darkness. A rustle from the floor. "Yeah, this is ridiculous. You're going to freeze. Just get in the bed." There was a long pause. I could feel the weight of that silence, the careful consideration. "Are you sure?" His voice was small, hesitant. "It's a queen-sized bed," I said, trying to make my voice sound casual, practical. "It's big enough. Stop being an idiot and get in before you catch pneumonia." I heard him get up, the soft padding of his feet on the hardwood floor. The mattress dipped as he slid in beside me, keeping a careful, respectful distance. He lay on his back, ramrod straight, and I did the same. We were two statues lying side by side, a chasm of empty sheet between us. But I could feel the heat radiating from his body, a warmth that had nothing to do with the room temperature. My skin prickled with awareness. I could smell the clean, familiar scent of his shampoo. I focused on my breathing, trying to make it slow and even, terrified he would hear the frantic beating of my heart. That night, neither of us slept much. We just lay there, perfectly still, sharing the same space, the same air, but separated by a universe of unspoken feelings. The chasm between us on the bed began to shrink over time. It was a slow, incremental closing of the gap, measured in millimeters each night. A foot would accidentally touch his. A hand, flung out in sleep, would land on his side of the bed. Each accidental touch was a spark in the dark, and we would both freeze for a moment before pretending it hadn't happened. Then, one night, he rolled over in his sleep and threw an arm across my chest. His body was flush against my back, his breath warm on my neck. I lay there, trapped by the weight of his arm, by the weight of my own desire. This was it, the moment of truth. My body was screaming at me to turn around, to close the final distance, to wrap myself in the comfort he was unconsciously offering. But my mind, the ever-present guardian of my fragile heart, urged caution. This was sleep. It meant nothing. He was dreaming. To react would be to take advantage, to shatter the delicate trust we were building. So I did nothing. I simply lay there, barely breathing, until the sun began to filter through the blinds, and I memorized the feeling of his body pressed against mine, cataloging it away as another beautiful, painful secret. He started doing it more often. He would turn toward me in the night, seeking warmth, seeking comfort, seeking something I was too afraid to name. He would curl his body around mine, his head sometimes finding the crook of my shoulder. I became an expert at feigning sleep, at keeping my breathing deep, and even while my insides were a chaotic storm. I lived for those nights, and I dreaded them in equal measure. They were a taste of a reality I desperately wanted, offered under a guise that allowed him to take it back at any moment. He would wake up in the morning, disentangle himself with a mumbled apology, and pretend it was just a consequence of sharing a bed. He never acknowledged the intimacy of it. He never looked me in the eye when he did it. It was our secret, a thing that only existed in the dark, a thing we both tacitly agreed to forget in the light of day. This was our ritual. The quiet approach, the shared darkness, the unconscious closeness, and the morning's denial. It was a fragile, beautiful, and utterly unsustainable dance. And it was during this period, this long, drawn-out ballet of ambiguity, that the night on the couch happened. The night he didn't pull his hand away. That touch, that simple, conscious act of holding my hand in the light of the television, was different. It wasn't shrouded in the plausible deniability of sleep. It was a choice, and it changed the entire choreography of our dance. The days following the hand-holding incident were fraught with a new kind of tension. The ambiguity I had grown so accustomed to had been punctured, and I didn't know what was rushing in to fill the void. We avoided talking about it. We avoided even looking at each other for too long. The easy, comfortable silence that had once defined our friendship was now heavy, thick with unasked questions. The ritual of the nights continued, but it was different now. When he came into my room, there was a new hesitancy in his step. When he got into the bed, the distance he put between us felt intentional, a conscious reestablishment of a boundary that had been blurred. I felt a cold knot of fear in my stomach. Had I imagined it? Had I read too much into a simple gesture of comfort between friends? I felt like I was losing my mind, caught in a limbo between what I had felt and what his actions now seemed to be telling me. My quiet observer's mind, usually so adept at reading the subtle currents of his moods, was lost at sea. The shoreline was gone, and I was adrift in a fog of uncertainty. This went on for a week. A long, agonizing week of stilted conversations and careful distance. I felt him pulling away, and the panic was a physical thing, a clawing in my throat. I was losing him. In my foolish hope, I had somehow broken the most important rule. I had let him see that I wanted more. I had responded to his touch, and in doing so, I had scared him off. The pain of that thought was sharper than any loneliness I had felt before. I decided I had to fix it. I had to be the one to retreat, to rebuild the platonic walls, to show him that nothing had to change. I had to prove that I could be the friend he needed, even if it meant burying my own heart. The breaking point, the moment that finally shattered the unbearable silence, came on a Saturday night. He had been out, a rare occurrence lately, at a work function. He came home late, well after I had gone to bed. I wasn't asleep. I was just lying in the dark, listening for the sound of his key in the lock. I heard him move around the apartment, the quiet, Familiar sounds of him getting a glass of water, of him shedding his work clothes. I waited for him to go to his own room. I braced myself for the silence, for the confirmation that our ritual was over. But then, I heard the soft creak of my bedroom door. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, a silhouette against the dim light of the hallway. I held my breath. "Leo," he whispered. His voice was thick with exhaustion and something else I couldn't identify. I didn't answer right away. Part of me, the self-preservationist part, screamed at me to pretend to be asleep. Don't engage. Don't get drawn back into the cycle. But the larger part of me, the part that loved him more than I loved my own peace of mind, couldn't bear it. "Yeah," I whispered back. He came into the room and sat on the edge of the bed, his back to me. His shoulders were slumped. He looked defeated. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely audible. "For what?" "For being weird this week." "For everything." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of deep frustration I knew so well. "My head is a mess." I sat up, the blankets pooling around my waist. The moment felt fragile, like a soap bubble. I knew that my next words could either solidify it or make it pop. I chose honesty. "You held my hand, Julian." He flinched, a small, almost imperceptible tightening of his shoulders. "I know. And then you acted like I had the plague." He was silent for a long time. I could hear the clock on my bedside table ticking, each second a small hammer blow against the quiet. Finally, he turned his head slightly, not enough to look me in the eye, but enough that I could see his profile in the gloom. "I didn't know what it meant," he said, his voice strained. "I still don't." "What did it feel like?" I asked, the question leaving my lips before I could stop it. It was too direct, too vulnerable. He took a deep, shaky breath. "It felt right. It felt quiet. Like my brain finally shut up for a minute." He paused. "And that scared the hell out of me." We sat there in that charged silence, the truth of his words hanging in the air between us. He was scared. He wasn't rejecting me. He was wrestling with himself. The realization was a wave of relief, so profound it almost made me dizzy. The knot of fear in my stomach began to loosen. He was still sitting on the edge of the bed, a world away. I made a choice. I reached out and put my hand on his back, between his shoulder blades. I felt the tension in his muscles under my palm. He didn't pull away. "You can talk to me," I said softly. "You know that, right?" "About anything." He let out a long, shuddering sigh, and his whole body seemed to deflate. He leaned back slightly, a silent acceptance of my touch. "I know," he whispered. "That's the problem. It's you. It's always been you I can talk to. But I don't. I don't have the words for this." "Leo," he finally turned to face me, and in the dim light, I could see the glistening track of a tear on his cheek. It was the first time I had ever seen him cry. The sight of it broke my heart and stitched it back together all at once. This wasn't about me projecting my feelings onto him. This was real. His confusion, his fear, his turmoil, it was all real. He wasn't the unknowing initiator anymore. He knew. He just didn't know what to do about it. He shifted on the bed, turning to face me fully, our knees almost touching. He looked down at his hands, then back up at my face. His eyes were wide with a kind of desperate sincerity. "Can I ask you something strange?" he asked, his voice cracking on the last word. My heart stopped. The world seemed to slow down, the air growing thick and heavy. This was it. The precipice. I nodded, unable to speak. "Would it be okay," he began, his voice dropping to a whisper, "if I kissed you?" The question was a physical thing. It landed in the space between us, shimmering with a terrifying, beautiful weight. He wasn't making a move. He was asking for permission. He was giving me all the power, laying his vulnerability bare. He was making sure that this time, there would be no ambiguity, no plausible deniability. This was a conscious choice, and he was asking me to make it with him. My mind, which had been a whirlwind of anxiety and overanalysis for weeks, went completely still. There was only one possible answer. It was the answer I had been holding in the deepest part of myself for 7 years. "Yes," I breathed. He leaned in slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull away, to change my mind. His eyes never left mine, searching for any sign of hesitation. I met his gaze, and in that moment, I let him see everything. I let him see the years of quiet affection, the carefully guarded hope, the profound and unwavering love I had for him. He closed the last inch of distance between us, and his lips met mine. It wasn't a passionate, movie-style kiss. It was hesitant. It was tender. It was a question and an answer all at once. It tasted of salt from his tears and a desperation for something real. It was a kiss of homecoming. It felt like the end of a long, lonely journey and the beginning of a new one, all at the same time. His hand came up to cup my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek, and I leaned into his touch, my own hands finding their way into his hair. When we finally broke apart, we just rested our foreheads together, breathing the same air, our eyes closed. "Okay," he whispered, a sound of pure relief. "Okay," I echoed. The word was so small, so simple, but it held the weight of 1,000 conversations we'd never had. It was an agreement, an acknowledgement, a foundation upon which we could finally begin to build something new. But the foundation, we would soon learn, was still fragile. A single kiss, no matter how honest, couldn't erase years of ingrained friendship or the deep-seated fear of the unknown. The morning after was a study in awkwardness. We woke up tangled together, a position that would have been a secret thrill just days before, but now felt charged with a new, uncertain significance. Julian woke first. I felt the moment his consciousness returned, his body tensing beside me. He extracted himself from my arms with a surgeon's precision, careful not to wake me. I kept my eyes closed, my breathing even, but my mind was wide awake, cataloging his every move. He slipped out of the room without a sound. When I finally emerged into the living room an hour later, he was already dressed, a duffel bag at his feet. "Morning," he said, his eyes fixed on the coffee machine. He couldn't look at me. "Hey," I replied, my voice betraying a nervousness I couldn't hide. "Going somewhere?" "Yeah," he said, finally glancing at me, a quick, fleeting look. "Work thing. Last minute. They need me on-site in Chicago for a few days. Maybe a week." A cold dread washed over me. A work thing. Last minute. It was a lie, and we both knew it. Julian's work trips were always planned weeks in advance. He was running. The vulnerability of the previous night had been too much, and in the harsh light of day, he was retreating to the safety of distance. I wanted to call him out, to demand we talk about what had happened, but the words wouldn't come. I saw the panic in his eyes, the desperate plea for me to just let him go, and my own fear of pushing him away for good kept me silent. I felt the hope of the previous night begin to curdle into a familiar, bitter disappointment. I had misinterpreted everything. Again, the kiss wasn't a beginning. It was a moment of confused, grief-stricken weakness on his part, and I had been a convenient source of comfort. The thought was a physical blow. "Oh," I said, my voice flat. "Okay. Well, travel safe, yeah. Thanks," he mumbled. He grabbed his bag, and for a second, I thought he might say something more. He paused at the door, his hand on the knob, his back still to me. But he didn't turn around. He just opened the door and left, the click of the lock echoing in the silent apartment. The week he was gone was one of the longest of my life. The apartment felt cavernous, haunted by his absence. Every room held a memory of him, of our easy companionship. I tried to work, to lose myself in the familiar process of developing film in my darkroom, but the images that emerged felt flat and lifeless. My focus was gone. I replayed our last conversation, the kiss, his panicked departure, over and over again in my mind, searching for a clue I might have missed. Had I been too eager? Had my yes been too quick? Had the depth of my own feelings scared him off? The silence from his end was absolute. No texts, no calls. It was as if he had vanished. My hope, which had soared so high, was now in a nosedive, and I was bracing for the crash. By the 5th day, my hurt had hardened into a quiet, simmering anger. I wasn't angry at him for being confused or scared. I was angry at him for his cowardice, for leaving me to grapple with the emotional fallout alone, for making me feel like a fool. I deserved more than a silent retreat. Our friendship, if nothing else, deserved more than that. I decided that when he came back, I wouldn't let him hide. I wouldn't let us slip back into a strained, awkward silence. I was going to demand the one thing he had so far been unable to give me, the truth. He returned late on a Friday night, a full 8 days after he had left. I heard his key in the lock and my entire body went rigid. I was sitting on the couch, in the exact spot where he had taken my hand, though it felt like a lifetime ago. I didn't get up. I just waited. He walked in, dropped his bag by the door, and finally, looked at me. He looked terrible. He was pale, with dark circles under his eyes, and he had lost weight. The confident energy that was his signature had been completely extinguished. He looked like a ghost. "Hey," he said, his voice raspy. "Welcome back," I said, my own voice colder than I intended. He winced at my tone. He stood there by the door, uncertain, like a stranger in his own home. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. I wasn't going to be the one to break it this time. I had chased him enough. This time, he had to come to me. Finally, he walked over and stood in front of the couch, wringing his hands. "Leo, I am so sorry. What are you sorry for, Julian?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "For kissing me? Or for running away like a thief the morning after?" My directness seemed to stun him. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. He sank down onto the coffee table, facing me, his hands clasped between his knees. "Both," he said, his voice cracking. "God, Leo, both. I'm sorry for all of it. I've been an absolute coward." I just looked at him, my face a mask of neutrality, not giving him an inch. I was done making it easy for him. "I spent the entire week in a hotel room in Chicago," he confessed, his eyes pleading with me to understand. "I didn't go into the office once. I just walked and thought. I went over everything. The last few months. The last few years. Us," he took a ragged breath. "I've been so stupid. I was so wrapped up in my own narrative, in what my life was supposed to look like with Sarah, with anyone, that I couldn't see what was right in front of me. I couldn't see that the only person who has ever made me feel safe, the only person who has ever made my brain go quiet, was you." He looked up at me, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "When I kissed you, it was the first honest thing I think I've done in years. And it terrified me, because it meant that everything I thought I knew about myself, about what I wanted, was wrong. It felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, and my first instinct was to run as far away from the edge as I could." His confession, the raw, brutal honesty of it, chipped away at the wall of anger I had built around my heart. I could see the genuine turmoil, the self-recrimination he had been putting himself through. He wasn't a coward because he didn't care. He was a coward because he cared too much, and he didn't know how to handle it. "Why didn't you just talk to me?" I asked, my voice softer now, the anger giving way to a deep, familiar ache. "Why did you leave me here in the dark?" "Because I was ashamed," he whispered. "I was ashamed that I had used your comfort, your friendship, as a crutch without understanding my own feelings. I was terrified that I had broken the most important thing in my life because I was too messed up to know what I wanted. I didn't think I deserved to talk to you until I could figure my own head out. You don't get to make that decision for me," I said, the words sharp with the pain of the last week. "You don't get to decide that I'm too fragile to handle your confusion. We were supposed to be in this together. That's what friendship is. That's what, whatever this is supposed to be." A single tear finally escaped and rolled down his cheek. "I know," he said. "You're right. I know you're right. I screwed up. I was scared, and I hurt you, and there's no excuse for it. But I'm not scared anymore. I'm done running." He reached out then, his hand hovering in the air between us, a hesitant question. "I'm back, Leo, if you'll have me, and I'm ready to figure this out. With you." I looked at his outstretched hand. The same hand that had started all of this. The same hand I knew so well. My anger had dissolved, washed away by the tide of his sincerity. All that was left was the bone-deep love I had for this complicated, frustrating, beautiful man. I took his hand, his fingers wrapped around mine, a firm, certain grip this time. It wasn't a tentative question anymore. It was a promise. "Okay," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Okay, Julian. Let's figure it out." The aftermath of the confession was not a sudden, cinematic explosion of romance. It was quieter, more deliberate. It was the careful, painstaking work of rebuilding a foundation. We talked for hours that night, sitting on the living room floor, our knees touching, our hands still linked. We talked about everything. We unspooled years of unspoken feelings, of missed signals and misinterpreted gestures. I told him about the slow, quiet way my love for him had grown, how I had resigned myself to it being a secret I would carry forever. He told me about the deep, persistent loneliness he had felt even in his relationship with Sarah, a sense that some fundamental part of him was unseen, unheard. He admitted that his leaning on me for comfort had started as an unconscious pull toward the one place he felt truly safe, but that it had slowly morphed into a conscious desire for a closeness he couldn't name. He described the feeling of holding my hand on the couch as a moment of shocking clarity, a sudden quiet in the relentless noise of his own mind. It was a long, messy, and absolutely necessary conversation. It was the kind of soul-bearing honesty that leaves you feeling raw and exposed, but also profoundly seen. In the days that followed, we began to navigate our new reality. It was a strange and wonderful dance of relearning each other. The old, familiar rhythms of our friendship were still there, but they were overlaid with a new, tender melody. There was a deliberate intentionality to everything we did. A simple touch on the arm was no longer an accident. It was a conscious act of affection. A shared look across the room was no longer just a friendly glance. It was a silent conversation. We were mapping a new country together, and we were doing it with a careful, gentle reverence. The ritual of the nights changed completely. There was no more pretense, no more ambiguity. The first night after our talk, as we were getting ready for bed, he paused at the door of his own room, a flicker of the old uncertainty in his eyes. I walked over to him, took his hand, and led him to my room. "This is your room, too, now," I said softly. "If you want it to be." He looked around the room, at the bed we had shared under such different circumstances, and a slow, beautiful smile spread across his face. It was the first genuine, unburdened smile I had seen from him in months. "I wanted to be," he said. That night, when we got into bed, there was no chasm of empty sheet between us. He pulled me close, his arms wrapping around me with a certainty that felt like coming home. I rested my head on his chest, listening to the steady, reassuring beat of his heart. There was no tension, no overanalysis, no fear. There was only a profound and overwhelming sense of peace. The most symbolic change was the simplest. The next night, when Julian came into the bedroom, he did something he had never done before. He reached back and quietly, deliberately, closed the door, shutting it completely. The soft click of the latch was one of the most beautiful sounds I had ever heard. The door that had been left ajar for months, a symbol of his uncertainty and our unspoken dynamic, was now closed. It wasn't a barrier to keep me out. It was a boundary to keep the rest of the world at bay, creating a space that was just for us. It was a declaration of privacy, of intimacy, of commitment. In that small, simple action, he was telling me that he was no longer halfway in, halfway out. He was all in. Our life together settled into a new kind of normal, a quiet, domestic intimacy that was more profound than any grand romantic gesture. It was in the way he started making me coffee in the morning, remembering that I liked a tiny dash of cinnamon in it. It was in the way I would find myself reaching for his hand when we were walking down the street, an unconscious, natural gesture. It was in the lazy Sunday afternoons we spent on the couch, my legs thrown over his lap, reading our respective books in a comfortable, shared silence. My photography changed, too. I started taking pictures of him, not posed portraits, but candid moments of our life together. Julian asleep in a patch of sunlight on the bed. Julian laughing at something on his laptop, his face illuminated by the screen. Julian at the kitchen counter, focused on chopping vegetables. I was no longer just an observer of his life. I was a part of it, and my camera was finally capturing the truth that had been there all along. We learned that love isn't always a sudden revelation. Sometimes, it is a slow process of discovery, a gradual unearthing of a truth that has been buried under years of friendship and fear. It isn't about finding a missing piece of yourself in another person. It's about finding a person who makes you feel more fully yourself, a person who provides a safe harbor where you can finally lower your defenses and just be. The journey was messy and painful at times, fraught with misunderstanding and retreat, but every uncertain step had led us here, to this quiet, solid place of mutual understanding. We had navigated the treacherous gray area and emerged on the other side, not unscathed, but stronger and more honest for the ordeal. We had learned that the most important conversations are often the quietest, and that the bravest thing you can ever do is allow yourself to be truly seen by someone else. We began to heal, not just from our individual heartbreaks and loneliness, but from the years of holding back, of unspoken affection. We began to heal in the beautiful, honest silence we had learned to create together.